Three, one. Welcome to the Weather Insights briefing. This is the tropical outlook for 2025. I'm meteorologist Scott Pitney along with meteorologist Jeff Lindner. Jeff, let's jump right into it. Let's talk about what is out there right now, what we're looking at, what we can expect for the 2025 season.
Oh yeah, it is tis the season, right? This is all the talk of the town is what is the expectations for the 2025 hurricane season? Last year was a really interesting season that it was kind of
Yeah.
busy, and then we had a kind of a lull in August and part of September, and then kind of ramped up again toward the end of the season. 18 named storms last year, so a little bit above average, not quite as active as those seasonal outlooks thought they were going to be this time last year. So what does it look like for this year? And we're going to go through a couple of the factors here that we look at for Atlantic Basin tropical activity. And so the first one here is sea surface temperatures. The first thing that kind of stands out from this map is there's a lot of warm water, above average water. So this is sea surface temperature anomalies. So everything you see in the brighter colors is above average water temperatures. Everything you see in the blue colors is below average water temperatures. And the first thing you kind of see in the Atlantic is we're generally above average, especially in the what we call the western part of the basin, the Gulf, the Caribbean, the Southwest Atlantic. Still above average out here all the way off the coast of Africa, but this is cooler than what we saw last year. So we've actually seen the sea surface temperatures decrease a little bit in this area. So while it's still above average sea surface temperatures, they are a little bit cooler than last year. They'll probably have some factor on this year's season. The other thing to point out here is you can kind of see this cooler than normal water here along the equatorial Pacific west of South America. This is what we call, it's not really a La Nina, but we're kind of coming out of that La Nina. So this water is generally warming slowly through this region, and we're anticipating, and I'll show this in a minute, that we're going to be in mostly neutral conditions. So not an El Nino, not a La Nina during this year's hurricane season, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means. The other thing to look at is, we need showers and thunderstorms for tropical systems to form. And you can see this is the precipitation anomaly for August, September, and October. So kind of the heart of our hurricane season in the Atlantic Basin. And you can see here there's not a really big strong signal. Last year we saw a lot of green down here in the Caribbean and into the Gulf, which was suggestive of an active hurricane season, especially in that part of the basin. But we're really not seeing a big strong signal this year. If anything, maybe a little bit toward the drier side. So this would suggest at least at some point some sinking air, some dry air in the Atlantic Basin, maybe a little bit more dust coming off of Africa than we've seen in the last few years. But it kind of looks really kind of unfavorable here in the Caribbean and then back down here in the tropical Atlantic. But generally favorable conditions, maybe some above average precipitation here in the Southwest Atlantic and then back down into the Gulf of Mexico. And this might be a little bit suggestive of what we call kind of these homegrown storms, or these storms that develop west of 60 west of about the Puerto Rico area. And these are the ones we kind of pay more attention to because they obviously can affect the United States. They have a higher chance of making landfall somewhere along the United States coast than, say, storms that develop out here off of Africa. So something to keep an eye on this year. I don't think there's any one hotbed area that we're really keeping a big eye on. But just you can see here, generally near average or a little bit below average precipitation expected across the Atlantic Basin. And then, as we mentioned, kind of the El Nino, La Nina. This is the forecast sea surface temperatures for that region in the Pacific, and you can see just kind of hovering right around normal as we go through our summer and into fall and even into next winter. And so this is not suggesting a La Nina or an El Nino. La Nina tends to enhance tropical activity in the Atlantic Basin. We had La Nina last year. And El Nino tends to reduce tropical activity in the Atlantic Basin. It produces a lot of wind shear and sinking air across the Caribbean. And so there's not a strong signal at all coming out of the Pacific for this year. So I think for the most part, the Pacific is not going to be a really big player in this year's hurricane season. If anything, it's probably leaning a little bit more what we call neutral cool, which would be more toward the La Nina phase. So that's probably why we're seeing a little bit more potential for activity in the Atlantic than maybe we otherwise would. And then one of the last things to kind of look at is what we call sea surface pressure. So this is the sea level pressure down where we live at the surface. everything you see in here in red is generally above average sea surface pressures forecasted for, again, for this is August, September, October. And you can see kind of above average pressures here in the Atlantic Basin, even in the Eastern Pacific Basin. Looks pretty favorable, interestingly enough, over here in the Indian Ocean in that
Yeah.
basin. But generally speaking, the higher the sea surface pressure, it's a little bit harder for tropical storms and hurricanes to get going. So there's certainly some factors here this year that aren't as favorable. They're certainly not as favorable as we were last year, but that doesn't mean we can't still see an average or a little bit of above average season. And when we talk about average seasons, we're talking 14 named storms, 7 or 8 hurricanes, and 2 or 3 major hurricanes. That would be average for the Atlantic Basin based on the last 30 years. And we're probably going to see a little bit above that this year. We'll talk about the numbers in a minute. And this is the European guidance that goes out through November. So this is for our entire season, June through November, and it shows kind of the areas. I zoomed out here and did worldwide of where it is expects reduced amounts of tropical activity, kind of the normal in the orange color, and then above average or enhanced values in the red. And you can see, interestingly enough, it sort of matches that sea level
Yeah.
distribution, pressure distribution pretty well.
Yeah.
But you can see here, a near average type season in the Atlantic Basin and the East Pacific, looking potentially below average in the West Pacific, and then kind of a little bit of a hot spot here in the Indian Ocean. But, I wouldn't draw a whole lot of conclusion to this. I don't think we're going to be significantly below average in the Atlantic Basin, going forward in the season. And then if you actually look at the numbers that the European is spitting out, this is the European model. You can see it's expecting about 14 to 15 named storms. These are tropical storms. Average is about 14. Same thing in the East Pacific, and then about average in the West Pacific. And so, this particular model is saying roughly about an average season, maybe a little bit busier than normal in the Atlantic Basin. And the NOAA numbers came out. Oh, I don't remember if it was yesterday or Thursday,
Yeah.
and they're kind of in line with what we're seeing: 13 to 19 tropical storms, 6 to 10 hurricanes, 3 to 5 major hurricanes. The Colorado state numbers, which came out in April, and they'll be updated here next in a week or so, in early June. We're kind of on the upper end of these numbers. I think they had 17 named storms, 8 hurricanes, and 3 or 4 major hurricanes.
Hmm.
And you can see here the probability of an above average season is 60% or so. So again, 14 is an average season for the Atlantic, Gulf, and Caribbean. So you can see the average is toward the lower bound of this year's numbers. And we could be up around 15, 16, 17 named storms. One thing I'll say, we talk about this a lot in this time of year, is everybody, what kind of season we look. I get asked all the time, what kind of season are we looking at? How bad is it going to be? It doesn't really matter how many storms we have. It matters if we get hit, if we get impacted. Last year was a great example. With Beryl, we didn't have any activity in August. August was completely dead in the Atlantic Basin, and we had that early season hurricane with Beryl. You go back to 1983, one of the quietest hurricane seasons on record in the Atlantic Basin. We only had 4 or 5 named storms in 1983. One of them was Category 3 Hurricane Alicia, which made landfall here in our area. So it doesn't matter the number of storms. It really matters where they make impact, and where they make landfall, and the kind of impacts you see from that. And one thing I'll say, I had the same question brought up actually yesterday on something I was talking to somebody about. We have to be ready here in June in Southeast Texas. Our hurricane season starts June 1. We can get tropical storms and hurricanes in the month of June here in Southeast Texas and Texas. Tropical Storm Allison 2001 was the first week of June. We had a hurricane back in 1986 that made landfall the third week of June. Hurricane Audrey back in 1957 was a Category 4 hurricane the third
Yep.
week of June into Southwest Louisiana. So we kind of have to be ready. We kind of have to be on our guard early in the season. It's not only August and September that we have to pay attention. Classic example last year with Beryl, for just right after the 4th of July holiday, with the Category 1 hurricane making landfall on our coast. So now's the time, and I know, Scott, you're going to talk a little bit about those preparedness tips. Now's the time to make those plans and take those actions.
Yeah, not just hurricanes too. Allison 2001, 30 plus inches of rain downtown Houston. So, yeah, there can be a early early season spark. So yeah, like you said, Jeff, pay attention year round. So what do we do with all this information? Well, the main thing is to prepare. So you see these lists and things like that all the time, and I think the main thing to keep in mind is make it your own. Okay, so when we talk about emergency kits and evacuation plans, make your kit your own. You can buy some kits kind of pre-made off of Amazon. Those are a good way to start. I've got one of those myself and then added to it with my own things. And then your evacuation route. You need to know where you are if you're in an evacuation prone area, know the zone you're in, that kind of thing, especially if you're along the coast. Stay informed through official channels like the National Hurricane Center, or you can keep it right here on Weather Insights. Just a programming note there too. Once hurricane season starts, we'll be giving weekly tropical updates. So you can keep it right here on the Weather Insights YouTube channel for that. Also, secure your property against wind and water, prune your trees, trim your shrubs. When you do need to take outdoor furniture in, have a place to put all of that, and make sure that you're doing everything you can to protect your home and property from wind and water damage. And then consider your insurance coverage too. Look at your home policy and talk to your agent about whether you should get flood insurance. Okay, so just all those things you can do right now and should do right now, and also have conversations. Have those conversations with your family. Have those conversations, not just the family in your immediate home, but also relatives around you, maybe folks that are a little bit older that need that kind of help from you. Then look at that as well. Talk to your neighbors, but have those conversations. Those conversations generate ideas that you might not have thought of. But right now is the time to prepare. Like Jeff said, we could get an early start. So make those preparations now. June 1st is just around the corner. Jeff, thank you very much. Thank you all for tuning in. Keep it right here on Weather Insights on our YouTube channel. Make sure you're subscribed and turn on those notifications so you are notified when we release a new show. Jeff, take care.